So look, welcome everyone to the second webinar in NERA's three-part webinar series, highlighting key findings from our Growing Australia's Oil and Gas Supply Chain report. The report was launched back in March at AOG in Perth, and the interest was so strong we decided to host a series and really bring alive some of the stories from the supply chain, and you'll hear a couple of fantastic stories today. This is the second webinar. It's how innovation in high-cost environments can create global value. Thank you for zooming in into your busy schedules. Hope you'll find this really interesting and informative today. My name's Paul Hodgson. I'm NERA's General Manager on the East Coast for Innovation and Stakeholder Engagement. Delighted to facilitate a real expert panel today. I'd like to welcome Stephen Harris from Pressure Dynamics, Michael Eilert from Exploration Drill Rigs, or XDR, and Miranda Taylor, CEO of NERA, our panelists. I'll introduce them properly a little later. They're all going to provide small presentations before we get into the discussion. Before we do get underway, though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting right across Australia today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, probably a number of people in the audience already come along to the first webinar. You've probably already been to a whole range of other Zoom webinars, but I'll just give a little bit of housekeeping. I'll start out by introducing NERA and the panelists. Miranda will then look at recapping the main points and talk a little bit about the report itself and set the scene for today's discussion on high-cost environments. Stephen and Michael will make short presentations, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion around the topic, around innovation in high-cost environments, creating global value, with a combination of my questions and yours. This is meant to be really interactive, so please, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, don't just wait till the end. Please add them into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I will try and throw some of your questions into the discussion as we go forward. So let's get started. So for those that didn't join last week or haven't heard of NERA, NERA stands for National Energy Resources Australia. It's one of 6 industry growth centres that were established by the federal government to take a strategic and industry-led approach to driving innovation, productivity and competitiveness in our key global industry sectors. NERA, like the other growth centres, is a not-for-profit organisation led by a board of industry leaders. Established in 2016, works across the breadth and depth of the sector to ensure that our world-leading energy resources sector stays ahead of the global automation technology transformation. This webinar series, as I mentioned, is exploring aspects of the NERA report on growing Australia's oil and gas supply chains. It was really remarkable to find out that this was the first time that anyone had analysed the size and composition of Australia's oil and gas supply chain. And really like to thank Alpha Beta, who helped us, who actually wrote the report for us. So today's theme from the report is how innovation in high-cost environments can create global value. Many Australian businesses are developing technology that helps mitigate the high cost of working in Australia, moving their products from the relatively simple to increasingly complex. These advanced solutions are helping drive down owner costs, either displacing less advanced alternatives or solving problems for the global industry that otherwise may be more labour-intensive or expensive to address. Bringing these solutions to market and demonstrating their value remains a significant challenge, however. Yet the entire energy sector could benefit from working together to tackle the Australian high-cost environment through taking a more proactive stance to the development and use of emerging technologies and innovative ideas. To really give us the key points of the Growing Australia's Oil and Gas Supply Chain report and set the scene for today's discussion, I'd like to now introduce Miranda Taylor, NERA's Chief Executive Officer. Miranda is a strategic and adaptive leader at the forefront of collaboration and innovation across the energy resources sector. Chief Executive of NERA since its inception in 2016, Miranda brings a deep and broad range of energy resources industry experiences, skills and capabilities. Her leadership of NERA is bringing together the country's best minds from technology, research and enterprise to achieve NERA's vision of Australia as a global energy powerhouse, a sought-after destination of investment and a leading source of knowledge and solutions. So over to you, Miranda, and thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm just going to share my screen. So just give me 2 seconds. Okay, So I don't want to spend too long on recapping, because we covered the supply chain study last week in some detail, and had a good discussion around the sort of the generic issues facing Australia. But I thought in order to frame our discussion today, which is really about how do you innovate in a high cost environment, which Australia is what is perceived to be, how do we operate in that environment? Specifically, we just need to look at the context. And I think we touched last week on the fact that there are three compelling large drivers for why supply chains and innovative supply chains are going to be so important to Australia's future prosperity. And they are the fact that we have, before the COVID-19 crisis, already got a significant productivity challenge facing the country. We also now have COVID-19 impact, and I think COVID-19 has revealed a global focus on localizing, not necessarily protectionist, but growing more resilient and deeper supply chains as we come out of the COVID-19 recovery. And the third challenge, obviously, is the whole issue of low carbon technology. And to address these three challenges, they need to be industry-led, as Paul said. And as the Minister for Karen Andrews says, they need to be driven by science and technology. And that's really at the heart of being innovative in a high-cost environment. So just very quickly, our supply chain study revealed a $7 billion opportunity to value add by building a stronger and more innovative supply chain in oil and gas. Interestingly, though, I think Alpha Beta said that this is one of the most surprise factors for them, was just what the size of the domestic oil and gas supply chain value it already is, which is 38 billion GVA to the economy. And this is something that hasn't really been studied before. So, you know, they are already making a significant contribution to Australia, and there's a potential for them to make, for the supply chain to add a lot more. So three potential challenges that we saw, which I think I can leave up on the screen and you can read them. But basically, there's a tendency to perform relatively low complexity, highly localized supply chain opportunities. We've got high costs, and it's difficult for the SMEs, therefore, to compete in what is a mature global supply chain market. This one slide says it all. This is about how do we move up the value curve in what is a high cost environment. So we can compete towards the right hand side of this quadrant by deepening our value creation, rather than focusing on just low cost, but actually focusing on where the productivity improvements can come by deepening the value creation. This is an interesting slide, I think, and it's slightly different to the one I shared last week. And I think this really will go to the heart of the conversation that you're about to have with Michael and Stephen, which is what is the supply chain's go-to market strategy, and what's relevant and not relevant. And I think the things that are going to come out in the discussion today are highlighted by the things that are in this table, which is strong client relationships and buy-in from key decision makers, effective product and services marketing and education about the product, identifiable channels to enter the supply chain, provision of product or services in collaboration with other suppliers. And I think that's really critical. And that's why NERA's focused a lot on clusters and other supply chain strategies, which actually enable small businesses to come together and offer combined services and combined solutions. And if you want to look at an oil and gas regime that does this so well, it's Norway. And they are famous for it, of enabling their small businesses to bundle their services and also to export themselves to the world by combining early stage funding and lean business operations to maximize finances. But we'll go into more detail in some of these things. So that is the scene setter. I think we're now going to have a really, really interesting exploration of some of these topics in a much deeper way. And this is really where we wanted the focus of today to be, was to actually get Michael and Stephen's very important insights into how they've actually worked effectively in a high cost environment. And I should just say that the high cost environment is both a negative and a positive. So, you know, you can take it both ways. There are some negatives and that we need to address and see if we can challenge the high costs. And there are other areas where actually operating in a high cost environment can be a positive, not the least being because we've got high skills, world-class research facilities. We're a safe country. There's lots of things that might add to our costs, but actually also contribute to making Australia a really attractive place for business to operate in. So I think we can look at it from a positive and a negative. So, so having set the scene, I'm going to hand it back to Paul, and Paul's going to facilitate a discussion with Michael and Stephen.
I'd like to now introduce Stephen Harris, Commercial Director for Pressure Dynamics. Steve has worked at Pressure Dynamics in executive leadership roles for the past 6 years. He has a Master of Business Administration and specializes in business development, marketing, commercial management, and strategy. He has more than 20 years experience for engineering and specialist services and products across the oil and gas, mining and power and utilities sectors throughout Australasia. Steve was instrumental in transitioning Pressure Dynamics' predominant business from capital equipment manufacturing to maintenance and repair services, whilst maintaining core competencies for all activities in the business. Successful geographic diversification was further effected for regional workshop operations in Darwin and in Karratha to support activities across the Pilbara region of Western Australia. Steve continues to lead the company's technology and innovation and partnering and alliancing programs in support of the company's differentiation, competitive advantage, and value-add delivery to clients. Thanks, Stephen. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. My turn to now share screen. So the elevator pitch for Pressure Dynamics. We run by 3 business lines. We focus for hydraulics, cranes and lifting, and through products. Our business has been around for coming on 40 years now, and we've been hydraulics engineers and specialists in the field throughout that time, and in many cases the preeminent supplier and vendor to the industry, especially the oil and gas sector, throughout those 40 years. Our cranes and lifting division was kicked off in the last 18 months and was a significant diversification of the business. And our product lines with hose assemblies and componentry sales and service are an integral requirement of the other 2 business lines. In the energy industry, we focus very heavily in the operations and maintenance space, in particular inspection, maintenance and repair, and that extends, especially in the current environment, for a lot of modification and upgrade works. We do considerable works for storage, maintenance and preservation. As part of that, testing operational readiness and mobilisation of equipment through project management is absolutely essential for clients. We're mobilising to offshore and onshore locations, often quite regional. We back everything through our professional engineering services, and Paul, in the very kind introduction he gave, touched on our history for original equipment manufacture. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been developing technologies in the space of modelling, simulation and general performance technologies. Of interest, this initiated through client interest, where we then proceeded on to take the risk in deciding to make a business case and emerge into this space. Just touching and trying to introduce some of this technology very quickly. We take a 2-dimensional schematic. We're very focused hydraulically. Of course, this can extend into electrical and instrumentation and controls, can extend into other functions as well. The key is to make it into a visual model and one that represents. So just to quickly represent that, I'm going to play a short part of the video for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we can see, just pause it there. What we can see through that is where the schematic is digitally representing pressure, flow, and other functional performance of the system in a very visual manner. It's particularly valuable for all personnel in an organisation, whether the contractor, whether for the client, in coming to a strong understanding without having to interpret the full extent of a two-dimensional schematic. Through that, we can optimise the reliability and productivity of the system and simulate the performance of the system in the software and the setting. Likewise, when we develop maintenance, repairs and upgrades, we can basically simulate the performance of the system, and effectively it's a digital before physical de-risking of the system. Very quickly, touching on some successes with the technologies, an export activity over in West Ghana, an issue where the client was facing challenges with one of their offshore pedestal cranes. They'd had more than 3 parties, including the OEM of the crane, out to try and troubleshoot the system. They'd spent in excess of $1 million. Effectively, we carried out functional modelling, verification with a technician on site, and carried out the troubleshooting, and for a spend of less than 10% of the others, delivered a solution to the client. A similar type of approach has been achieved through hydraulic systems for wellhead controls, and likewise into the mining industry, where in a particular instance, a maintenance issue had arisen through one of the technicians. They put a logic controller into the wrong slot, and apparently upside down. It was losing $500,000 a day in direct cost, and in the space of 1.5 hours using the model, we were able to troubleshoot the system. I'll stop sharing at that point, Paul.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Before we get to the discussion, I'd like to introduce Michael Eilert, Executive Director of Exploration Drill Rigs Proprietary Limited, or XDR. Michael's a chartered accountant and chartered secretary. He has a Master of Business Administration specialising in entrepreneurship. Michael has been instrumental in setting up the strategic direction and innovative culture at XDR that is producing the award-winning and patented onshore XDR workover rigs and ancillary equipment, which are reducing the cost of well servicing by around 50%. So over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks again for the introduction for the second time, Paul. My name's Michael Eilert from XDR. We manufacture onshore workover rigs. We started our business in 2007, and we were initially manufacturing drilling rigs for the mining industry. But what happened is the GFC hit, and then we couldn't sell any drilling rigs anymore. And lo and behold, the coal seam gas industry started in Western Queensland. And then we saw an opportunity to break into a market that was dominated by legacy players. And we're just proud to announce last year that we've sold 9 workover rigs into Australia, another 3 to Shell, and we just won a large contract to sell our workover rigs into Oman. As Paul has stated, we're obtaining about a 50 to 60% productivity saving on site, which is obviously reducing the cost of well servicing. So this afternoon, I'd like to briefly show you our technology and then outline the strategy that we undertook to break into a market that is often very difficult and dominated by multinational players and a lot of legacy and high switching costs. Just a little bit about our technology. On the left-hand side, you'll see our catwalk, which is connected to our workover rig. What we noticed is that the technology in this industry hasn't changed for 30 years. And the industry focused on a cost leadership model. So what was happening was, first of all, the technology was made in North America. Then it seemed to have been copied into Asia and other countries. And there seemed to be a race in the industry in this space to produce cheaper and cheaper workover rigs. By doing that, the industry has sacrificed a lot of innovation. So there hasn't really been any innovation in this sector, which is onshore well servicing and workover rigs, for about 30 years. So what we produce is customizable equipment for well operators. Rig packages, the first rigs were produced in Australia were £75,000. We just sold £160,000 rigs to Swims, and we got contracts in the Middle East for £250,000 rigs. We have painted technologies. Unlike other workover rigs, we do not require guy ropes, so the workover rigs can be set up in 30 minutes. And we use electric over hydraulic controls, and we can do hands-free tripping that produce 100 joints per hour. I don't expect a lot of people here understand the terminology, but the great thing is that we are actually reducing the cost of well servicing, and it's certainly making it a lot safer for the industry. The transferable skills that we learned from the mining industry is that why can't we actually build a workover rig that you can drive down the road? So the complaints from the government and things was the equipment on semi-trailers, they're killing the bridges. And so we managed to package the whole workover rig to stand and to be located on a standard 8x4 truck. What I'd like to discuss now is our own industry analysis of the oil and gas industry, in particular for the workover rigs. When we look at the industry, it's a mature industry. They have low oil prices. So what the industry was really looking for was product innovations to improve the productivity of well servicing. What the industry was providing was lower and lower cost workover rigs with very little innovation. Sure, they're fairly cheap to buy for well servicing companies, but they weren't actually providing any productivity gains. The other challenge we had was the large barriers to entry, the large multinational companies with legacy systems and high switching costs, and that caused a lot of challenges for companies like ourselves to break in. So when we looked at the products, there's very little innovation. So the challenge to us was design a new mousetrap, design a new workover rig that is fit for purpose. So these industry niches shouldn't exist. So our challenge was to try and dominate this new area, which is dominated itself by large companies. So the approach that we took was look at value innovation or blue ocean strategy. So the challenge for us was to go into the industry and look at what's working, what could be improved, and then have a step change and provide something unique and different compared to our competitors that are competing on cost. The following slide provides the roadmap that we took to, which actually at the end of the day created our success. First of all, to break into this market, you really need an innovative culture. We're fortunate enough that we came from the drilling industry, so we could bring transferable skills from ourselves and our partners into the oil and gas industry and look from the outside in. It's a roller coaster ride. So we've invested heavily in research and development, and we really got a really strong understanding of the needs and wants. And we're really surprised that our competitors haven't really done this for at least 10 or 15 years. It's important to get customer sponsorship. So we managed to get an anchor client with Shell and industry and government support. And through that industry and government support, we're able to leverage their branding, which allowed us to break into the industry. We've partnered with government and other businesses, and we really looked deeply into the pains of the industry and the potential gains. And part of the process of interaction is we developed internal champions within the industry, which actually advocated for us when the key decisions had to be made. As I said, the critical part for us was to develop a new mousetrap, develop a new workover rig. So we identified the key attributes, focused on a value curve, and then identified what we could do better, what we could actually eliminate, you know, to develop something of value. Once we had the product, our next challenge was to actually educate the customers. And we had two customers, one of the well operators who actually have the equipment operating on their site. And then secondly, as our ultimate customer, the service companies. So we spent a lot of time in our yard with VR, demonstrating our technology and providing training. And through that process, we got more internal champions and developed industry references. So it's been a long, hard journey. You've got to have deep pockets, and you got to have a lot of courage. But we have successfully commercialized rigs in Australia, and we're opening new markets into the Middle East. COVID-19 is causing a few barriers to us because we can't travel out there, but we're using technology to overcome that. as I said, the proof is in the pudding. It's important to get industry references, and Kevin Gallagher from Santos at a CTEC conference in 2007 highlighted the value of our workover rigs. He stated that the cost of their actual well production reduced by 50% when compared to conventional workover rigs. Thanks a lot for your time, and that's my presentation. I hope that's been very useful.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. Another great Australian supplier, along with Pressure Dynamics. Great to hear about that, and who wouldn't want a 50% reduction in cost? Well, what we might do is actually go to an early part of the discussion between Miranda and Stephen, and maybe Miranda touched on the COVID-19. It's pretty hard to ignore that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and Miranda talked about the localization. Stephen, perhaps to you, have you got any thoughts on or any experiences that you're seeing on any of how that's changing the behavior of any of the participants in the industry?
Absolutely. Look, there's no doubt from our perspective that we're seeing a very significant impact across the industry from COVID-19. It can be as simple as the logistics that for an offshore asset, historically there's been rooms with 4 bunks to a room, and under the COVID situation, it's now down to 1. So this gives really strong limitations for the operators in terms of what they can do. Similarly, there's complications when it comes to onshore facilities, but offshore it's definitely very pronounced. The operators are needing to continue the maintenance, well, the operation and the maintenance of their facilities, with about 25% of the typical POB, persons on board, contingent that would typically be on those assets. So even for critical works, whether that's in the pipeline of works for a specialist contractor or even for a generalist contractor, it's very difficult for anyone to be mobilised out to those assets when they're struggling just to have the baseline contingent on board the facility.
So do you see any positives, some good signs that have come out of, are there any changes in behaviour in terms of willingness to collaborate on efficiency and, to do something different than they did before?
Absolutely. So a couple of aspects there, one of which you mentioned collaboration. Many of the operators have reached out to their critical vendors. They've sought engagement and to understand how they can get multifunctional resource out to the facilities. When they can only mobilise 1 in 4, they can't mobilise 4 different contractors and wait for X period of time between mobilising each one. They have to be able to send out a certain number of resources and get the 4 different jobs done still within that time frame. So it has opened up that requirement to engage and collaborate between the parties in coordinating those services.
I'm intrigued by this question around, coming from a high cost environment, is surviving and getting any business in Australia that key driver? And then, as both of you have worked in international environments, maybe it's a double question. Are you surprised by the reaction you get internationally to something which perhaps just was really you having to do business in Australia to actually get any business had to actually meet certain benchmarks which are perhaps more difficult to meet than they may be in some international markets? Perhaps who'd like to start with that one, Michael or Stephen?
So I think in addressing the first part of the, I guess the leading comment to the question, it is inherently a high cost environment that we're in. For Pressure Dynamics, with its history, it operates as a specialist. We have specialist trades, specialist craft trades, that comes at a cost. We have specialist engineers, it comes at a cost. We have specialist project management and general management. It all comes at a cost. Miranda touched earlier, this is both a disadvantage and an advantage in many ways. It forces the issue. To some extent, especially with the cycles in the market, there's been a couple of crises that have occurred. And it feeds in that high cost structure forces everyone to review what the underlying costs are and to justify each one of those. Leading into the technology development side, if in this high cost environment, you just do the same thing as everyone else, then all you're doing is competing on cost. So the basis is to have some form of differentiation and preferably a form of competitive advantage. If you're not offering that to your client, then they can just choose one of 3 other providers in that space. And that then extends out into the international setting. There's a general reluctance to invest and spend money up front for some of these technologies, and in particular the one that Pressure Dynamics has worked to. And it's often in the state of a crisis that clients are actually willing to put the money in to get them out the other side. Once they're in a crisis, it actually doesn't matter quite how much it costs to get there. So having that awareness of what the technology is and how it can translate to value then leads that when that crisis arises, you get the phone call.
Yeah, yeah. Which says something about the relationship and trust and some of those things that were seen as quite high on the perception that Miranda talked about as well, right? So the sort of value and relationships and that, not necessarily always just the product or the service. Michael, any comments?
I think it actually gives us as Australians a benefit to operate in the high cost environment. When I look at our competitors, they're so used to reducing the cost of their product, and I've been to China and India and other places, and they don't really have a focus on value innovation and how to create value. So their market and business strategy is always cost leadership. And I think because we understand the value and value innovation going forward, and because the oil and gas industry is looking for productivity savings, I think we got actually a unique perspective on how to do this. We're not interested in nickeling, diming, saving $5 on a bit of steel. We're interested in creating value over time. And I think we've done this in the mining industry, and I think we've got a great opportunity to do this in the oil and gas industry. And when you look at it's a mature industry, they're looking for productivity savings, and we can focus on the attributes. We understand that they need to reduce their oil and gas transport costs. We know that they need fewer crew members. We know it has to be safer. And it allows you to deal with all those aspects that they're after, as opposed to let's build a cheaper product. So I think it actually provides us an advantage. And I'd like to see, with the innovation of Australia, what we've done in the minerals industry transferred in the oil and gas. And I think there's plenty of opportunity. Like in our area, there is a niche area that hasn't been looked at for 20 or 30 years. And I'm sure there's other niche areas in the oil and gas industry that needs to be, may I call it, Australianized.
Right, thanks. Miranda, I'll jump in whenever you like, but I've got some questions coming in from the audience to Michael and Stephen, so I'll keep going, but please jump in when you've got a point you'd like to make. There's a question here around, if you've got proven innovation in Australia, how do you penetrate global markets? Do you offer up site trials in their operations overseas? Do you bring prospective clients to Australia? I mean, how does that engagement process work? Perhaps Stephen? Is there a model you use, or is it horses for courses?
Very much horses for courses. Again, look, it's very heavily aligned to marketing the message. Where is that value? How is it derived? What is it? And I've seen it through XDR and XDR's website and our own and other places, conveying case studies. Where is the advantage? What has been achieved? How has it been delivered? Just proposing that there's a willingness to innovate, to take a different approach. That alone can be a very cool message to get out there to the markets, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Michael?
The oil and gas industry in the workover space is it is a very large market, but there's very few players, and they talk amongst each other. So the best thing we can do is prove productivity and get references in Australia, and that goes a long way with how we broke into the Middle East market. We also have virtual reality and a lot of other toys where they can pay headsets and actually look at the product. But at the end of the day, they get tour reports from the well operator and they can see that the top technology is doing well. And then the oil and gas industry itself wants those productivity savings. So they're almost becoming our internal champions. But like I said, all the way along the process, we talk to site managers, rig managers, and we almost have an army of people out there because they've been involved in the whole development process, you know, advocating for us. And that's just very strong and powerful. It's a small industry. They move around the world. We had the Canadians and the Americans come out and then they move back. So the internal champions that we developed over time has just been invaluable. And then secondly, it's NERA, Oz Industry, and they actually provide the branding. We're competing against Schlumberger, JERA and other companies, and they don't know who XDR is, but by partnering with groups like yourselves and Oz Industry, that actually opens the door and gives us a lot of credibility. Otherwise, XDR could be anything else in the world. So internal champions and then getting the government organisations and the semi-government organisations to help open the doors.
Yeah, look, it's a really good point there, Michael, around, I mean, people often say, well, there's not much collaboration happening between, you know, at the corporate level, but people talk in the industry, right? So the grapevine, you know, well managers, well site managers are talking to other well site managers. People are moving around the industry. So there often is quite a flow of information. And as you say, in these sort of transparent results are being found, then it's likely that, that they're going to be shared quite widely through whatever means. You sort of touched on Michael, there's a question specifically for you around, and a fan, I must say, within the audience who said your rig looks really superior to traditional means. But around the funding, you mentioned Oz Industry. Were you lucky to get some support for the development of your rig, either from Oz Industry or for some early investors, or?
The 3 Fs, family, friends and fools, remortgage the house, a lot of R&D funding, but we really spent a lot of time structuring our contracts so that we get a large cash up front. So we were just fortunate that we had Shell and other companies that were happy to fund a fairly large chunk of our costs up front once we get to commercialization. But to get there, you know, we're in a bit of a hole until we managed to sort of break in, and we're just fortunate, but fortunate as a function of hard work, and we just happened to be in the right place. The oil and gas price dropped from 120 to about $30, and then there was a need for new equipment. So we just happened to be at the right place. I mean, but obviously the internal champions made a big difference. So that's basically how we broke in.
Yeah. Stephen, any thoughts on you know, funding for those sort of R&D and the innovation?
Oh, absolutely. The R&D tax incentive is absolutely essential to small and medium enterprises like ourselves. Michael touched on that also. The 3 Fs definitely comes into play. I'm sure there's lots of different ways of touching on that phrase as well. But through that, in our particular case, we were able to align to a cornerstone client who was looking for a particular need to be met. Now, in this instance, and it's interesting to draw the parallel to what Michael is speaking to, this client was actually in the mining industry. They had a much greater willingness than our oil and gas customers to basically work with us, collaborate, help us build a business case, structure the milestones such that we were able to build the cost of our development into the project and ultimately deliver something that was still a lower cost than if the client had engaged the services of a third party to provide the same. So it really does come down to those champions, that willingness for a need, and then their willingness to make an argument internal to their organisations to justify the spend that you, as an SME, you can cover your cost in building that innovation on their behalf.
Yeah.
So Stephen, can I sort of just explore that a little bit? In that, you know, we're obviously in a the oil and gas industry is in very much an ops and maintenance phase now compared to where we were.
Yeah.
And we've now got a serious imperative to find use technology and innovation to find the cost savings, because all the things that we could do, we did in the last oil price challenge. So, and the comment that you've both made about knowledge transfer, I think, do you think that we're in a world now where technology is back where it should be? It probably was there 20 years ago in the early days of oil fields, in the North Sea, etc., and in America, but in Australia, is technology and the combination of technology advances and oil price environment and the need to decarbonize, so we're in ops and maintenance. Are you seeing that this is creating a new environment where the oil and gas supply chain is opening up?
To a varying degree. The oil and gas industry, in my personal experience, is fairly conservative. More a case of wanting to be first to be third. Prove it elsewhere. But that transferability of something that's been proven elsewhere in a related industry or somewhere else in the resources industry definitely has a value. Moving on to whether it's the cycles in the market through to the current oil price drop, definitely technology is seen as a tool. It's part of the journey for driving reduction in cost and increased productivity. The tool set that we have developed through our own technologies and our application of subject matter expertise, we have heavily promoted it, that through the troubleshooting, through the design optimization, through the de-risking of operations and maintenance activities, ultimately it will also lead to a 5 to 20+% cost benefit, if not in the form of underlying cost, but also through improvements in reliability and productivity. It's an essential part of the message within the industry.
Michael, any thoughts?
I concur with Stephen. It's been very challenging because we've always done things the same way. It's a high switching cost. It's part of our process is actually educating the well operators so then they can set tender documents for the well servicing companies. And I used to see a rig with a lattice mast, with guy ropes, with band brakes, with 5 or 6 people operating, and to get them to show them something different and to convince them that we have something different when they're so used to the same thing, it's certainly been very challenging. But as Stephen said, I mean, we had some success in the mineral industry and were able to transfer those skills across. And no, it wasn't until we had our first rig out there that people started to believe. So it was very challenging. And then the operators and the friends and the nepotism to some degree and the legacy made it very difficult to break in. And it's almost like creating a new religion. So we spent a lot of time talking to well operators and convincing them, because ultimately they have to agree to let our equipment to come on their site, on their side. And the other thing that they're focusing on in the industry is obviously safety. They're really concerned in this sort of external environment to have another disaster, because with climate change and carbon and everything else, I mean, that just wouldn't play out very well. So apart from innovation and productivity, the next question is always safety. And there's just a large drive. In the markets, we see that we have 2 markets. We have what I call the first world market, where they want all the technology. And then there's the low cost market where cheap still wins, where the labor costs are fairly low. So it's fairly interesting how the markets are sort of balanced, but safety is becoming more and more important. And I think the industry can't afford for another, disaster.
Yeah.
Very true.
Thanks, Michael. Look, I've got one probably last question, I suspect, before we do some closing remarks from you all. But how strong do you believe the appetite is in the customers in Australia to support local high-tech innovation, particularly when compared to buying technology from overseas?
It depends on the value proposition.
Yeah.
Blue Ocean strategy, people follow that. I mean, if you provide value over time, I mean, the mining industry does the same thing. They're looking for a compelling value proposition, and if it's compelling enough, they'll jump.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not trying to just replace, you're not just import replacing, you're not just trying to, do the same, but just local. You actually, as you say, you need that blue ocean strategy of really looking for something that's got a significant differentiator in value proposition. How about you, Stephen?
Absolutely essential. One is a need, an emerging need. I touched before on if there's a crisis, they're willing to do what it takes to get past that crisis. As long as that value proposition is there, it meets a clear need, and that is within the operational priorities of the business. There will always be a way to back that strategy and back that opportunity with a client.
Yeah, yeah.
I've just one question. Sorry. How did you find, once you started to get business, engaging with local suppliers to supply you? How did you find that in Australia in building your supply chains? Maybe Michael, you could start.
It's very challenging, Miranda. We don't have a phone book or a database to go to. The other thing that's happening in the industry is they're looking at risk. So they're looking for one-stop shop, and it's very hard for us. I mean, we got gaps, and it's hard for us to actually find suppliers in Australia, let alone overseas, who can fit our needs. There's no such thing as a yellow pages for oil and gas. So a lot of our time has been trying to find suppliers. I mean, we want to move into more AI and more telemetry and more digital, but it's really hard for us to find partners. So I'd say 15 to 20% of our time it's been trying to find, suppliers and competent people, and it's a growing industry, and they don't have the background, and there's an extra level of compliance in this industry over and above probably the mineral industry. You've got API industry standards, Shell standards, it just goes on and on. So 30% of our costs is actually compliance, and our suppliers have got to understand that. So you need a piece of paper nearly for everything in the oil and gas industry. So it's been difficult. It's getting better, but it's still hard.
A slightly different situation for us in response to your question, Miranda. Longer history in specifically to the oil and gas industry. And in many cases, Pressure Dynamics has been that party over those 40 years for sourcing those alternate forms of supply, whatever the case might be for the supply chain. So much of this comes down to relationships. It's being well networked across the industry, well networked both domestically and internationally, and being willing to put in the long, hard yards, including late night hours, teleconferencing into international markets to track something down if that's what it takes. So that takes very committed people, and people who are willing to put in that extra effort.
So I believe that Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, our sister growth centre, they've had this platform to connect advanced manufacturing during the COVID-19 crisis. And I understand that many people have said they found it much easier to navigate than the ICN network, for instance, to find supply. Now, of course, it's got a specific target, which is the COVID-19 situation. But would tools like that help you in the future?
Absolutely. We're registered with both ICN and through the COVID-19 AMGC network. Definitely all these tools have a place. I think the key is spending the time to get comfortable with those tools and understand what's required to meet the requirements.
I think it's very interesting. I think there's very little, I mean, it's getting better, but the ability to sit in front with another business and talk about ideas and collaborate, and that's where opportunities are created. More and more forums where we can get together and just chew the fat and talk about opportunities. We're a small company, we've got a small marketing team, and we're often been asked to provide solutions to problems, and we just don't have the capacity to do that, but we also don't know who to actually go and see. And we've got an industry where there's one-stop shops like Subsea, NOV and others that provide everything. And like back to your Norway comment before, Miranda, is finding an alternative to these large companies who can provide a one-stop shop. The industry is trying to put the risk onto one player. So for us, we have to become bigger and we can't be everything for all things. So there's lots of opportunity, but the more and more we get together, the more we can look at opportunities.
Yeah. Supplementing Michael's comment there, touching on the Subsea Innovation Cluster here in Perth, which of course does have national extension, but it is starting to prove to be a very effective forum through which parties in the subsea industry are connecting, in particular with the operators, and starting to field particular problems and queries that are arising. So that clustered approach and getting, in particular, small and medium enterprises to collaborate together is a fantastic way forward.
We're pretty much at time, but I might just ask Stephen and Michael just for a couple of last questions. One last question, which has come through, which I think is a really good one to end with, which is what's next for you in innovation? I mean, I don't expect you to give away trade secrets, but you know, where do you see innovation going for your businesses over the next little while?
I'll jump in very quickly there and basically comment on consolidating where we've got to. We've achieved some initial successes. Now it's about fully commercializing what we've achieved and actually generating a true return. Then looking for incremental offerings that we can make further into the market.
We're moving into telemetry systems where we'd like to charge a fee to monitor our rigs back to base. We'd like to learn more about artificial intelligence and robotics. So we want to move away from a company that continues to sell large capital equipment to be more of a service provider. And we're certainly looking for partners that can help us on that journey. We certainly got the platforms and we're playing in this space, but it's certainly not our competitive advantage.
Thanks, Michael. Miranda, have you got any final thoughts before I wrap things up?
No, I think there's some questions that we haven't yet got to, so we might see if we can't get them answered outside of the session and feed it back to you all.
Okay, thank you for that. Look, thank you very much, everyone, for today, and particularly thanks to Michael, Stephen, and Miranda for a really interesting discussion. Certainly from my perspective, and we've had some good comments back through the chat function as well. And thanks for the audience for joining and engaging, asking some questions. And as Miranda said, if we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up with you separately. And look, NERA's here for you. Please make contact if we can assist you either related to this webinar or any other aspect of growing your business in this sector. We have one more webinar in this series at the same time next Thursday, the 18th of June. So please head to nera.org.au to register for that particular webinar. The next webinar will explore the topic of it's tough being global and local.